Hi, and welcome to Serenity Now, a place for entrepreneurs to ask questions, learn, get connected, and be inspired. Join us as we talk about all things business and the search for the ever-elusive Serenity Now in both business and personal life.
Hey Peggy, why should we listen to this episode today?
I think that subtraction is a concept that we haven't considered. I think taking something away from a process or a schedule or even sometimes clients is maybe something that we could consider, and in the end we might be more successful for having looked at it in different terms. Addition and subtraction, not one or the other. Both of them are great things to do in our workplace.
Hello and welcome everyone to another chat with the Serenity Sisters today, and excited to chat about something different today. Have you guys thought about the idea of less or less is more, or subtracting versus adding, or is it best to subtract and add to life and in business? We are walking through those questions today, and we had one of the Serenity Sisters find an interesting article about a book about Subtract, and I'll send it over to Peggy to introduce the topic today.
Thanks, Rita. Hi, everybody. I ran across this article. My favorite guy, Bob Sutton, had made a comment in his LinkedIn about a book called Subtract and how he resonated with that idea that instead of always adding on, overbuilding, over-engineering, adding, that sometimes the best strategy is to subtract. And as I read the article, I started to realize, that is a really good strategy. We often think that we need to do something more, and sometimes we actually need to remove ourselves. He mentions in his comments about removing himself from meetings or reducing the length of meetings or making the meetings more timely toward the actual event so that it's not just another thing to do a week before, have a conversation about a talk that's going to happen a week later, that kind of thing. Freeing your own schedule or taking redundancy out of your schedule by subtracting as opposed to adding. I thought it was brilliant, actually, and I think it's really wise. And when I started to look into the book a little bit more, I noticed that Klotz, who's the author, said that this isn't a new concept, that many times it's found in art, and one of the most famous would be Leonardo da Vinci, who defined perfection as when there was nothing left to take away. He also talks about a Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, who advised to attain knowledge, add things every day. To attain wisdom, subtract things every day. So I love little quotes like that. I think that we can learn a lot from those famous words. So Candace, you've been going through lots of this in the past year within your organization. Why don't you just sort of tell us how that applies in your situation?
Well, I can tell you the euphoria that I get every time a staff member comes to me and says, well, we made all these changes and I used to do X. And it could be processes, it could be this, it could be that. They come to me and they're like, well, how do I do it now? And I get gleeful when I can respond to them and just say, you don't. You don't need to do it anymore. The new system, it takes care of it entirely. There's nothing for you to do. And for me, that means that I've just freed up however many hours of their time over a year to do something more important. We've been spending a lot of time subtracting unnecessary processes and very manual processes from our business over the last year. And wow, has it made a huge difference. I'm talking like full FTEs worth of people's time, not spent doing manual things that just really add no value to their day, my day, the client's day, because we serve clients. And it feels good. Every time we get rid of something, it feels really good.
I know Rita has a really good story to tell too.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. When we work with companies, one of the first things we do is kind of go through and we dissect line by line items, because we get called in, with the gap between access to capital and entrepreneurs. So how do we go get funding? But I can usually find money. By going through that exercise. So sometimes you actually don't need to go get more money. What you need to do is remove certain things. Or, just as an example, I recall going into a food manufacturing company a pretty big one. And so I walked the plant, talked to the staff, went through the, financials, and I found 13 things within 2 hours, from obsolete equipment that was just sitting there that they could easily sell and get money for, to training practices and just changing them slightly with a new way to train people, which I used for years, to being able to say, we don't actually need to do this or have this many SKUs, because the 80% of the SKUs that are actually working are the ones we want to keep. And so you just added all this extra stuff on the menu because you thought you needed it. And so it just takes sometimes that external view or that external person to come in without emotion, that has no attachments, that just kind of goes, guys, here's a few things you might have overlooked, and just sheer kind of surprise. And then kind of like, how could I not have seen that? How come I missed that? That's just because you guys are in it day to day, and someone else walking in, it's easier for me to see that. But then I had the tears because they were so excited. We can do this, we can do this, we can do that. And, I love being part of that too. I'm like, yeah, this is exciting. How much money can we make on some of this stuff? And that was just the first step of the process. But yeah, just that alone, I think we ended up saving time, but also finding money to the tune of about $500,000, which was pretty crazy, but that's typical. That's typical if you haven't done your review in a while. So like Candace said, once you implement system and process and you're freeing up time versus working through the redundant stuff. And I know sometimes you feel like, well, it's going to take time to set up this other process and systems and everything else. And I'm sure you walked through that. So you had to add first, right, Candace, before you could subtract?
Yep, there was a whole lot of adding before subtracting, for sure.
That is the concept, though, add and subtract. Sometimes the answer is to add a new process, and sometimes that does add a burden in implementing that new process. But at the same time, when you look over everything you do, you can begin to subtract the things that are either redundant or unnecessary, or you never should have been there in the first place. Like, how did that happen? Sometimes we grow and we ignore those things just because it's easy to ignore them.
A lot of the changes when we were starting to dissect things and pull things apart and make changes, a lot of the times we found, like, I'm in the accounting industry, very risk adverse group of people. And some of the processes that we have in place were designed to offset, to make sure that errors don't happen. But you can process to death, right? Sometimes the benefit. So when you start analyzing the risk or the cost or whatever that the process was designed to avoid or eliminate or, mitigate, sometimes you've overprocessed it and you've gotten the risk down to so small that now the cost of mitigating the risk is more than the cost of the risk itself. So I found that while we were going through those processes, there's a lot of things where it was like, well, do we really need to worry about those 10 returns that maybe we didn't follow up, in 5 days instead of 3 days? Like, is that really necessary? I mean, that's not exactly the example, but that's kind of the idea, right? Will 5 days do, or do we really need to be 3? And we're talking 10 out of like 1,200 returns.
So one of the things this article or this book actually says is we pile on the to-dos, but we don't consider stop doings. We create incentives for high performance, but we don't get rid of obstacles to our goals. We develop new laws without abolishing outdated legislation. I totally agree with that. I think that we just add on, like a really good example is our Income Tax Act. They just keep adding on, and there's so much stuff in there that they should just scrap and start all over.
The Income Tax Act is now actually 2 pieces. When you order a new Income Tax Act, it comes in 2 pieces.
She just held up about a 4-inch thick book. I think they're the only people who still print books, by the way.
And this is an old one. This is like 2018, so it's a really old one. And it's that like really thin paper.
Onion paper, about 4 inches thick. Welcome to Canada, people. Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
I was going to say, well, I've been guilty of this to-do list business where, and don't laugh too hard, but I'm running my to-do list and then sometimes I'll add stuff because it wasn't on there, but I did it and then I can check it off. So your comment on that, Peggy, was, what did you say earlier? I think you said something like, oh, so you're adding something so that you can subtract it, right? I guess in the end, what you're trying to do is finish things or move things out and, with our to-do list so we can get it done. But for some reason, I needed to add my extra steps that I did so I could feel better that I had actually done. Does that make sense? Has anyone ever done that?
Okay, we're going to come and do an overhaul at your house, Rita. I really like what Bob Sutton had said about the meetings, because I worked in one of the top 4 accounting firms, and I tell you, the meetings, the redundancy, the time waste, it's just horrendous. And so much of it can be done in such a smaller space of time, or actually not at all. And that whole idea of subtraction. And if you ever attended any of those meetings, they never actually listened anyhow. You had a whole bunch of partners sitting in a meeting with a speaker, and everybody was working on their computers because nobody had the time to spend in that meeting talking about internal numbers. So you really have to think, is this pushing us forward or holding us back? Do we need to add another meeting or do we need to take some meetings off? What ones are productive and what ones just stand in the way of productivity?
I think we've had like an overdose of meetings. I think that I'm the exact same way. In corporate land, I used to attend the least amount of meetings, that I could, because I would just go do the work. I found zero benefit in meetings for the most part because you could run them all within a few minutes. I was taught to be very efficient with my time. And even though there was typically an agenda, you don't need every single person's input or understanding to say, how can we, work through this? Or, there were so many different ways to run those meetings. And I was just a bit of a rebel too, right? So if I could get out of some of these things, I did that. But I just never found too much value in meetings. So even now, when I have a meeting, whether it's with staff or with clients, it's just really well understood in advance with an agenda and an understanding and how long we're going to take. And sometimes you go a little longer because you're in the zone, you're walking through a strategy or a piece or understanding that needed to get through or we needed to purge or walk through. But for the most part, if you actually are strict with that, you actually can get it done so much faster and just get to what you actually need to get done. So I'm not a fan of meetings. Somebody had mentioned another trick that they did. They made people stand in meetings because when you sit, you get comfortable. And then there's those meetings you're sitting, they bring food, they bring drinks, they bring all that. Yeah, let's do all it. It's like, how is this?
Every single meeting at the accounting firm I was at was usually with nice wine and good food, and it does not help. I agree. So one thing I remember going way back when when Dawson was a baby, I was the PAC president that year, but I was a nursing mom. The meetings could only go an hour or two because I had to get home to my baby. So I was the best PAC president because every single time a discussion would come up, and you have parents who never agree on anything, there's always somebody who wants to debate it, to the end of the world. So I would say, okay, sounds like you guys need to take this out of the room, come back next week. You 3 are committee now. You go away and talk about it, come back with it next week. And the parents loved me because every time a big, long debate came up, I appointed that person as the head of a little committee, and they had a little subcommittee, and off they went, had their discussion, and came back the next week. And that was all due to the fact that I had to go home and nurse.
It would also encourage those people that just talk for the sake of talking not to talk because they wouldn't want to get nominated.
That's exactly why I did it, Candace. And I think that some people waste other people's time just liking to hear themselves talk, and they're really not wanting to resolve anything. They just want to play, devil's advocate and have that, opinion heard by everybody that they surround themselves with. And it happens at business meetings too. And I really think as soon as you put it on them to take the topic away, take it away so that 20 people aren't wasting their time listening to it. And if, there's 3 of you that can go away and come back with some, suggestions, that would just be much more productive. So I subtracted from the parent group the people who wanted to chat about it.
I like that. I'm actually going to take some notes out of that. Our firm is working on implementing a 4-day work week pilot this summer. So we were planning on doing a 4-day work week for July and August. We have a lot of details to work out and capacity planning to make sure that we can still do it. But one of the things is reducing the amount of time we spend in meetings. And I'm actually kind of excited because our meetings tend to go that way. We start having these little side discussions and we go down this garden path. And so I'm hoping that we're going to be able to come out of this with a habit of knowing what we're going to talk about beforehand. The person that wants to talk about it is prepared. We talk, and if there's work to do, it goes away. We don't
need 20 people
the work in the
wasting their
meeting,
time on a topic that only 3 or 4 are passionate about. And I think the more people, the longer it takes to make a decision. So why not get the people who seem either most passionate about it or on opposite sides of the fence about it, get them to go away and come back with 2 or 3 suggestions to solve the problem, whatever it is. And then the greater group can have a vote on it. And they present, what their thoughts are on it, and it's over. It honestly, it's a way better way of dealing in a big group to get a decision made, especially, like you say, when you have some people who really don't want to action anything. They just want to be heard. They just want to be the devil's advocate. So put them on the committee, and that kind of puts an end to their negativity sometimes.
Yeah, I think you just need the taskmaster, at the meeting. That's the one that's calling the clock, the time, and as well as saying, yep, time's up for this.
Calling me, Rita?
Yeah, that's Peggy. Just call Peggy in and she'll get it done.
I do have a little bit of lack of patience for meetings, just because I just find, and it's not because I don't think that, some good comes out of it, but I really just think it's, for the most part, everybody in the room, if you count the dollars per hour, it's a very expensive way to make a decision.
Yeah. I think we ended up doing the count the dollars per hour on the meetings, and a bunch of stuff for that particular kind that I mentioned earlier, but several more after the fact. And I think you did it as well, Peggy, when you walked around the room and you thought about when you were at one of the big 4 and you were saying, look at how many heads are in this room and how much dollars did this cost us, in this 1 hour alone, and what could you have done with those funds or those resources? I'm 100% with you on that understanding of the whole meeting side of things. So
here's an interesting 4 points that he makes in his book. He says there are 4 ways to think more about subtracting. Invert, try less before more, expand, subtract as well as add, distill, get to the essence by stripping away the unnecessary, persist, keep focused on innovative subtraction. There you have it, the nuggets right there. Now you don't have to read the book.
I think one of the other things we were talking about earlier before the recording actually started was, in our lives, our personal lives, we've all made different changes. And the older we get, I think sometimes it's not easier to make changes because change is hard regardless, but it's easier to see perhaps what it is that you don't want anymore. And recently I've, let go of whether it's, a move to a new place where it's bigger, but there's less in terms of less chaos, less stress, and a lot more peace and joy. Or whether it's, reviewing your clients and seeing who fits and who doesn't fit anymore. Recently purging some, which created great joy for me, a huge joy. And it's just in the middle of being finalized and almost there to the end. And my Serenity Sisters are accompanying me with this joy journey as well. And I think sometimes we just need to give ourselves a moment to reflect because we're so busy just running and racing and just doing what has always been done. So same thing going back to your, it's always been 5 days. Oh my goodness, what if we did 4 days? It was always come into the office. Yeah, it was always come into the office, but somehow we were able to work remote. I mean, that's a hot topic in itself. What is best and what's best for one may not be best for all, right? So just having the opportunity to consider. And so again, you're adding more time to work through some stuff, but then that allows you to be able to step back and say, hey, perhaps I can take a look at this a little differently. I think it's always best to do that with someone else, not someone sitting inside your circle, someone external. And you guys have done it for me as well, sitting externally.
The biggest extraction or subtraction or whatever you want to call it, we did in my company when I was running a firm with 5 employees and everybody was running their face off and there was just a whole lot of chaos, is we really looked at the 130 clients we had and we really realized that if we dropped 30 of them, we only dropped 10% of our revenue. Because those 30 clients really gave us headaches and really didn't give us a lot of revenue and probably caused another person here in our requirement for staffing to accommodate all those clients. So instead of growing at that point, we decided to subtract those 30 clients, keep the same employees we have, and we really didn't realize very much difference in our revenue because it opened opportunities to take on bigger files.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that came out of the purging and reviewing is, whether it was moving to a new area where it was definitely calmer, more peaceful, less chaos, but I've never been so productive. And then letting go of clients, but then, like you said, Peggy, giving the opportunity for more to come in, but more that were a stronger fit. More that I had more passion and felt like I could, affect more change by taking on different roles or challenges like workshops or other pieces or nuggets that I couldn't do just because I was so immersed, in the other side. You totally understand, Candace.
Well, is it about time to do our quickfire? Go around and see what everyone's last thoughts are on this subject of subtraction. Candace.
So I'm most excited about having kind of a word for what I've been doing, subtraction, because really I was just looking at ways to make things more efficient, which I think probably is the same thing. But yeah, I can see a lot of the concepts brought up in the book in what we've been doing over the last year. And I'm seeing day by day the benefits of what we've done. Everything's just getting easier and work is a joy again. So I think I'm just going to keep at it. Maybe read the book in full and see if there's any other useful nuggets in there. Rita, your turn.
For my side, I think, I love what you said too, is now you have a word. That was great. It is true. We have a word. And I think the other thing was, for me, it's okay to subtract. It's okay to let go. It's okay to not keep adding on. And it felt really good to step out of several things this past month. And the first one was really tough. And the second one was thought about in a day and then released in a day at the same time. So I really, really learned quickly. Yeah, how awesome it was. But it's so funny with this concept, like, subtract, but it is giving the opportunity to bring more joy. It just reminds me of, who was that lady that says, if Marie Kondo or something, holding something, does it bring you joy? Yes or no? I thought that was really flaky when I first heard it, but it's kind of similar in business. Why are we holding on to these staff, or why are we holding on to these processes, or why are we holding on to this specific customer or a vendor or supplier just because we always have? It's comfortable. Change is not easy. It's not fun, to make those steps or do those things. You have to do some work. But if it isn't bringing you that, I know work is called work for a reason, but there can be joy in work. And I think we all feel it, when we're on the right track and on the right path. So I'd say get busy subtracting, but actually you're going to end up doing more. But I hope that more is more joyful.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rita. I think the thing we have to do is step back and look at our calendars and our clients and our business processes with a critical eye, and we have to look at it as not with the mind to add to it to make it harder, but to see what can be stripped away to make it more successful, easier, cleaner, leaner, whatever word you want to use to make that, ultimately joyful. Okay, so I guess that ends our episode today of Serenity Now for Entrepreneurs. We hope that has given you a bit of serenity, and if it hasn't, subtract something from your calendar.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and picked up some good tips and best practices that would benefit your entrepreneurial journey. Remember, none of the content in this podcast should be relied upon as standard legal or business advice. Always consult a professional for your specific business. You may know someone who could benefit from this podcast. Please share it with your business community, and perhaps it can give an entrepreneur you know some serenity now.